right, I'm really excited to do this video today. I am really hoping that the information that I present is going to sort of turn a light on inside of your head about the end times and about how to think about the book of Revelation. Revelation has been taught for years and years and years and years. And the way people do it is they tend to start at the beginning, chapter 1, verse 1, go through the book, basically assuming that the way the events are going to unfold is going to be sort of the way that they're recorded within the book. I'm going to show you today a really what I hope is a very clear way to understand the book of Revelation, and I'm going to use chapter 12 of Revelation, and I'm going to go through the whole chapter with you, and I'm going to show you how to think about interpreting the book. I have some show notes, and the show notes are going to be the most helpful to you if you watch the video. So you can use these while you're watching the video. I have a lot of little timelines in there, and it's not going to make a whole lot of sense unless you actually see it in conjunction with this video. Okay, so we're going to start with Revelation chapter 12, verse 1, and we're going to make little tiny timelines. So if you think that I'm not putting these events in the timeline correctly as indicated by what we read in Revelation, I hope you'll leave a comment. So something else I'm going to ask you to do is really just sort of suspend any ideas that you have about how the end times are going to play out. Let's just look at the passage. Let's let the passage say what it's going to say. It's actually pretty straightforward once you get an idea of how you're supposed to think about this. All right, so let's get started. Revelation 12, verses 1 and 2. And a great sign appeared in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun, with the moon under her feet, and on her head a crown of 12 stars. And she was pregnant and was crying out in birth pains and the agony of giving birth. All right, so what's being used here is obviously symbolism. There isn't a woman that's in the sky, but there is a constellation, the constellation Virgo, that is the only woman on the ecliptic plane, and this is how we get our signs of the zodiac, or in Hebrew it's Mazzaroth. My personal thinking is that the Revelation 12 sign on September 23rd of 2017 sort of put us in the book here. I believe that that was an actual literal sign in the starry heavens that let us know that the end times were upon us. A lot of people will say, oh, well, that sign has happened before and years past and so on and so forth. Well, that may be, but this is the only time that this particular alignment of sun, moon, stars has happened since the creation of Israel as a nation. So I think it's totally legitimate to view this as a fulfillment of this passage. So if we were going to diagram this, it would look like this, okay? The sign of the woman and the sun, moon, and stars. Okay. Satan can't mess with the sun, moon, and stars. These things are fixed in the heavens. God has fixed them there. The second thing is that the woman is in travail. She was pregnant. She was crying out in birth pains and the agony of giving birth. Okay, so she actually is having pains and she's in the agony of giving birth. Okay, so this is this sign in the sun, moon, and stars. The woman's in agony, in pains of giving birth. Okay, so that's the first little tiny timeline. Okay, we're going to have a second timeline. Verse 3, and another sign appeared in heaven. Behold, a great red dragon with 7 heads and 10 horns, and on his head 7 diadems. His tail swept down a third of the stars of heaven and cast them to the earth. And the dragon stood before the woman who was about to give birth, so that when she bore her child, he might devour it. She gave birth to a male child, one who's to rule all nations with a rod of iron, but her child was caught up to God and to his throne. And the woman fled into the wilderness, where she has a place prepared by God, in which she is to be nourished for 1,260 days. All right, so there are several events that are connected with the sign of the dragon. The dragon appears in heaven. So now we need to ask ourselves this question. How many heavens are there in the book of Revelation? Okay, we know that there is the starry heavens where this sign occurred, and a lot of people are going to think that because there was this other sign that appeared in heaven that we're talking about the starry heavens again. But we're not. We're talking about the heaven where God dwells, where Satan and his fallen angels are currently residing. We're talking about another dimension. From what we're going to read a little bit later on, we know that the dragon and Satan are the same person. The dragon is the symbol for Satan. So I have 8 events that I've associated with the sign of the dragon. The first one is that the woman is in travail. Okay, so basically we're going to go from here and we're just going to start another little timeline. All right, so the woman's in travail. The dragon is on the earth, and then he takes 1/3 of his stars, and stars are angels, and they're being cast to the earth. Then the child is born, and Satan wants to devour child. The other thing we learn about this child is that it's a male. It's a male child. And this is a child that's going to rule. The dragon wants to devour the child. The child is caught up to God. Rapture, it's harpazo. The child was harpazo, caught up to God. And then it says, and then the woman fled into the wilderness. And we know that she's there 1,260 days. The elements for the sign of the dragon are the woman's in travail, the dragon is on the earth, he takes 1/3 of his angels, he uses his tail and casts them to the earth. The child is born, this child is a male child that's going to rule. Satan wants to devour the child as soon as it's born. The child is caught up to God and to his throne, and then the woman flees into the wilderness for 1,260 days. Okay, so we've got 2 little mini timelines here. This first one from the first couple verses, and then the second one, which has a lot more information in it. Okay, so let's take a look at this next part, and we're going to make another little mini timeline. And all the timelines are in the PDF, okay, that I've made available in the show notes. All right, so the next part of this chapter is Verse 7, now war arose in heaven, Michael and his angels fighting against the dragon, and the dragon and his angels fought back. But he was defeated, and there was no longer any place for them in heaven. And the great dragon was thrown down, that ancient serpent who's called the devil and Satan, the deceiver of the whole world, and he was thrown down to the earth, and his angels were thrown down with him. Okay, so let's just sort of make a little timeline or sequence of events for verses 7 through 9. We've got the war in heaven that Michael and his angels, basically Michael initiates that war. And then we've got Satan cast down. All right, so that's a pretty simple little timeline there. There's a war in heaven, and then Satan is cast to the earth and his angels are thrown down with him. All right, this next section is the place that I really want to sort of focus on here, because this is where we get pieces of information that all of a sudden we should be asking lots of questions about, okay? So we've got this one little timeline here. All right, we've got this second one here. This third one is right here. And we're going to be making another little timeline. And I heard a loud voice in heaven saying, now the salvation and power and the kingdom of our God and the authority of his Christ have come. For the accuser of our brothers has been thrown down, who accuses them day and night before our God. And they've conquered him by the blood of the Lamb and by the word of their testimony, for they love not their lives even unto death. Therefore rejoice, O heavens, and you who dwell in them. But woe to you, O earth and sea, for the devil has come down to you in great wrath, because he knows his time is short. Okay, so here's where it gets a little weird. What we have are people rejoicing, people in heaven. Okay, there's a group of people that are the martyrs, okay, because they love not their life even unto death. Okay, and they conquered him, that is Satan, they conquered him by the blood of the Lamb and by the word of their testimony. So they are in heaven already. All right, and they have brethren who are in heaven. And by the way, angels are not brethren. So whoever this other group of people is, they are people that consider the martyrs their brothers. Okay? So we've got the martyrs, we've got their brethren, and the brethren are the ones that are saying that everybody can rejoice because Satan has been cast out. These people didn't love their lives even unto death. So what's been happening is the martyrs got here in heaven somehow or another. The brethren were rejoicing, and it was sometime after the martyrs were already in heaven that Satan was cast out. And Satan before then had been accusing the martyrs day and night. The brethren, whoever these people are, their brothers, had been there listening to that. Okay, so here's sort of what the timeline looks like now. Satan is there before the altar. He's accusing these people before God. They die. There's martyrs, people who love not their life, who die. Satan is cast out of heaven, and everybody is rejoicing. Okay, so what I want you to see here is that we're going to match up Satan being cast down, and sometime before Satan is cast down, there are martyrs on the earth. Okay, there's martyrs on the earth, and the martyrs and the war in heaven may be connected as well. Okay, there's martyrs in heaven before Satan is cast out. So here's some questions we need to be asking. Where did those martyrs come from, and who killed them? The beast isn't on the scene yet, okay, and we know that from other things that we're going to be reading. We know that the Antichrist isn't here yet. He's not here until after Satan is cast out of heaven. We learn that in another place. So who's been killing all these people? Who's been killing these martyrs? When did they die? They obviously died before Satan was cast out. Satan had been accusing them before God. Who is this group of brethren that the martyrs and these people are brethren? Who is dwelling in heaven at this time? Saw that he'd been thrown down to the earth. He pursued the woman who'd given birth to the male child. Okay, so Satan is thrown down to the earth, and he starts to pursue the woman who'd borne the male child. Okay, so who was it that gave birth to the male child? Well, it's this woman that we've been talking about over here. She's in travail. She gave birth to the male child. And when Satan is cast out of heaven, he begins to pursue this woman who'd been in travail. Okay? He begins to pursue the one who'd borne the male child. Verse 14, but the woman was given the 2 wings of the great eagle so that she might fly from the serpent into the wilderness to the place where she's nourished for times, and half a time. Okay, now we have to ask this question. Over here, we saw that the woman fled into the wilderness for 1,260 days. Here's a woman who also gave birth to the male child. It seems to me to be the same woman. But now she's given the 2 wings of the great eagle so that she might fly from the serpent into the wilderness to the place where she's to be nourished for times, and half a time. All right, so let's put in another timeline here. So the dragon is thrown to the earth, and he pursues the woman, the one who had borne the male child back here. Okay? And the woman is given the wings of eagles. Okay, she's given wings so that she could fly into the wilderness for a times, and half a time. And that is, basically 3.5 years. Okay, it's the same amount of time as 1,260 days. So what we can say here is that the woman that flees, who's given the 2 wings of an eagle, that she could flee from the serpent for times, and half a time, is the same woman that we see over here, who is in travail, who flees into the wilderness. Okay, so we're going to diagram the last part of Revelation 12. Verse 15, the serpent poured water like a river out of his mouth after the woman to sweep her away with the flood. Okay, so the serpent pours this flood out of his mouth. But the earth came to the help of the woman, okay, and swallows the flood. Verse 16, but the earth came to the help of the woman, and the earth opened its mouth and swallowed the river that the dragon had poured from its mouth. Then the dragon became furious with the woman and went off to make war with the rest of her offspring. Satan is going to pour a flood out of his mouth to try to overcome the woman, and the earth is going to help the woman, and then the serpent is going to make war on the rest of the woman's offspring. That looks like a persecution to me. Okay, so we know that there is a persecution that is going to happen to believers before Satan is cast out. Once the serpent is cast to the earth, we know there's going to be another persecution as the serpent makes war on the rest of the woman's offspring. Okay, and from other places like here, and when the woman flees for a time, times and half a time, that there's going to be about 1,260 days over here as well. Okay, so now here's what we have to do. We have to take all these little timelines and we have to put them in a sequence. Okay, because what's been happening here is we have a basic timeline, and then we kind of recapitulate and we go back and we get more details that fit into the timeline, and then we get even more details as we basically circle back and find more details. And what we have now is all the information that we need to make a big timeline just from Revelation chapter 12. Okay, so let's go back to that very first little timeline that we have, okay? We have the Revelation 12 sign, and there's a date associated with that, September 23rd of 2017. And then we have the travail of the woman. We have the woman giving birth. We have Satan on the earth, Satan wanting to devour the child. The male child is born, and then it's raptured to God and to his throne, and the woman flees into the wilderness. Okay, then we have all the events associated with the sign of the dragon, which are basically right here. Okay, let me just sort of see if I can get this in here. Okay, all the events associated with the sign of the dragon, which is what this timeline is right here. The woman's in travail, the dragon's on the earth, he casts a third of his stars, this male child is born, the dragon wants to devour the child, but the child is caught up to God and to his throne, and the woman flees for 1,260 days, okay? All of that is right here in the sign of the dragon, okay? That whole timeline is this right here, sign of the dragon. And that includes a rapture of people who are going to rule. And there are people who are going to rule in conjunction with Christ. Rule with a rod of iron, which is talking about the millennial reign. Okay? So sometime during the sign of the dragon, the child is going to be caught up to God and to his throne. And right after that, the woman flees. All right, so do we see the woman fleeing anywhere else? We know that once Satan is on the earth, he is going to pursue the woman. Okay, so we can assume that sometime before the woman flees, but after the child is caught up, this is when we're going to have the war in heaven. And we're also going to have martyrs. Sometime between when the child is caught up and when the woman flees, there's also going to be martyrs. And we know there's going to be martyrs after the woman flees. They're going to be persecuted. So basically what I've done is I've taken a bunch of small timelines and matched up places that connect, like the woman fleeing, the woman being given eagle's wings. We're going to match those places up in time. When Satan is cast out, we know that before he is cast out, there's already martyrs, and the martyrs have brethren. So there are two groups of believing people who are in heaven before Satan is cast out of heaven. We know that once Satan is cast out, he's going to try to pursue the woman now, where before he was after the child to devour the child, but now he's after the woman. The woman escapes, and now the dragon is going to be after other offspring of the woman, other believers, and He's going to persecute them. So we see several persecutions. We see one time when the dragon's going to try to devour the child. We also know that there are going to be martyrs in heaven before Satan is cast out. We know that Satan is going to try to capture the woman or destroy the woman. There's going to be persecution there. And when he can't do that, we know that there's going to be more persecution of the woman's other offspring, who are other believers. So there's a whole bunch of different persecutions that are sort of recorded in this chapter. And we have a ton of information in this one little chapter, and we're given enough information so that we can know the sequence that these things are going to happen in. Okay, so here's the order of events as depicted in Revelation 12. This is all part of the end time timeline. All right. Now, a lot of people, they just want to isolate the day of the rapture, but they don't want to understand it in the context of Revelation, of, how Revelation is looking at this. That in order to understand any one thing about the book of Revelation, you have to be able to look at all of it. Okay, so in order to get a timeline from Revelation chapter 12, we actually have to match up different events. We can sort of use them to sort of match them up, and then we can see what other things are happening. So the first thing in this timeline was the great sign of the woman. This was a celestial alignment in the starry heavens involving Virgo, Leo, Mercury, Mars, Venus, and Jupiter. And then the woman is in travail and about to give birth. The dragon is on the earth, waiting to devour the child as soon as it's born. Satan casts a third of his angels to the earth. The male child is born. And right here, this should give us the fact that it's a male child and it's born. We should immediately in our minds think about a 7-day with an 8th day presentation to God, because a male child is going to be circumcised on the 8th day. And even though that little time frame is not mentioned, that is something that we can assume. There's going to be a period of time when Satan is wanting to devour the child after it's born, but the child is going to be caught up to God and to his throne. And we know that it's on the 8th day that a child is presented to God. We can kind of make an inference or an assumption here that there's 7 days with an 8th day right there. And this is going to be very, very important as we look at other parts of Revelation. So Satan is going to attempt to devour the child. The child is going to be raptured, caught up to God's throne. Believers are going to be martyred. There's going to be a war in heaven. Satan will be cast out. There's going to be rejoicing in heaven. The dragon is going to pursue the woman with a flood. The woman will be given eagle's wings to flee the serpent. The earth will swallow the flood. The woman will flee into the wilderness for 1,260 days, or times and half a time. And the woman, the remnant of Israel, will be in the wilderness for 1,260 days while Satan makes war on the woman's other offspring. Okay, so what I want to do now is I'm going to give you the interpretation for the symbols, because we're talking about dragons and woman, this woman, a male child, a flood, the earth swallowing a flood. And these are just symbols that have to be decoded, and then we can actually know what the story is in plain English. So when Revelation is using the word heavens, it can be referring to the starry heavens, where the great sign of Revelation 12:1 and 2 took place. It can be talking about the dwelling place of God, which is a spiritual dimension. Or it can be talking about mid-heaven. That's the place where the birds fly. The woman can also be one of three things. It can represent the constellation Virgo or Betula, the only woman on the ecliptic plane of the zodiac, or the Mazzaroth, as the Hebrews would call it. So the woman can be the constellation Virgo, which I believe it was with the Revelation 12 sign. It can be the nation of Israel, because it was Israel that gave birth to the man-child, who is Christ, one who's going to rule all nations with a rod of iron. And the woman can also represent the remnant of Israel. That is, this group of Israeli people who are going to be fleeing into the wilderness, okay, for 1,260 days. Travail is a war or an invasion. When the woman is in travail, it's not the constellation Virgo that's going to be having an invasion or a war. It's going to be the nation of Israel. Israel is going to have a war or an invasion. Travail is a word that's used for an overwhelming calamity. Okay, and I'm not just talking about things like the virus or anything like that. This is a major invasion of the country. A birth is the emergence of a person into a new phase of life. Okay, so when a child is born, it goes from being an unidentified baby in its mother's womb to being identified. In this case, it's identified as a little boy. It's a male child. The male child and the child, this represents Christ and those who are going to be fellow rulers with him. And the rod of iron represents Christ's millennial reign. So these are people, Christ, and those who are fellow rulers who will rule with Christ during the millennium. The stars also can be one of three different things. They can be literal stars in the sky. They can be angels, whether good or bad. And they can be messengers. And they can be glorified individuals, whether it's Christ as the morning star or whether it's the stars that Jesus holds in his hand, which I believe are glorified people. The dragon represents Satan. God's throne is in heaven. It's God's royal presence in heaven. The flood is an army or troops, and we read about that in Daniel 9:26. And the eagle's wings are a swift rescue by God, and we read about that in Exodus 19, verse 4, where God says that he delivered the nation of Israel out of Egypt on eagle's wings. Once we have decoded all of this, now I can give you the actual order of events, not using symbols anymore, but just telling you what's going to be happening. So the great sign of Revelation 12, 1 and 2 was our heads up that God was initiating his end time plan as revealed in the book of Revelation. God gave the sun, moon, and stars for signs. The heavenly signs cannot be altered by Satan or by human effort. They are fixed in the heavens. The signs in the sun, moon, and stars are sure. The sign occurred within months of the 70th anniversary of the UN resolution which created the nation of Israel. If the fig tree prophecy is indeed an end-time prophecy, we can expect that the return of Christ, when he'll set up his millennial kingdom, will be within a 70 to 80-year time frame after the regathering of the nation of Israel. Using an 80-year upper limit, Christ's return would take place no later than 2027 or 2028. Okay, sometime after the great sign of Revelation 12, 1 and 2, the events associated with the sign of the dragon will take place. This is my interpretation. Okay, this is how I'm seeing this. Israel will be invaded or be on the losing side of a sudden war. This war may be the Gog-Magog invasion of Ezekiel 38. No one will come to Israel's aid, and she'll be all alone. Satan will come to the earth around the time of the war with a third of his angels, which he will have with him on the earth. Believers who are to rule with Christ will be born. That is, they will be identified as sons. In the Bible, there's a 7-8-day pattern associated with sons, with 8 days being the interval of time between the birth of the baby and its circumcision, naming, and being presented to God. This 7-8-day period of time will figure into this end-time timeline. Annihilating the sons of God will be the reason why Satan has come to the earth at this time. Believers can expect 7 days of spiritual warfare before they're caught up, raptured, or presented to God on the 8th day. The sons will be revealed on the day the war or invasion is brought to an end, when they're born. Hard labor ends once a birth has taken place. If the travail of the woman is the symbol for the Gog-Magog invasion, we know that God will initiate the war and also bring the war to an end. Satan will know it's time to come to the earth to attack the child as soon as the invasion begins. The end-time events actually begin with the war or invasion of Israel. There will be a separate great persecution of believers before Satan is cast out of heaven by Michael. And this persecution should not be confused with Satan attempting to devour the child, but will take place sometime after the child is already in heaven. Martyred believers who are present in heaven with their brethren, that is, raptured and resurrected sons, these martyred believers will have been martyred on the earth while the war in heaven is taking place. These martyrs are not martyrs of the beast, as we'll find out in Revelation 13. These martyred believers will be killed by the harlot, who will be drunk with the blood of the saints. This persecution is distinct from that of both the child and those whom the dragon makes war on after the remnant flees. The persecution of the believers, that is, the ones who appear in heaven at the time Satan is cast out, will coincide with the war in heaven between Michael and his angels and Satan and his angels. At the end of the war in heaven, the martyrs will be in heaven, and Satan will be cast to the earth. The martyrs, along with the already present sons of God, will rejoice that Satan is cast out. And I believe the sons of God are the 24 elders that we see in Revelation chapters 4 and 5, who are in the throne room of God. These are people who are going to rule and reign. Once Satan is cast to the earth, Satan will begin to persecute the remnant of Israel. That's the woman. This persecution of the remnant will take place primarily in Jerusalem. The remnant of Israel will flee from Jerusalem into the wilderness, and Satan's army will follow them. Israel will follow the Lord through an opening in the Mount of Olives. The departure will be very swift and enabled by the Lord. When Satan's army, who is the flood, pursues the remnant through the opening in the mountain, God will cause the mountain to close back up, destroying Satan's army. The remnant of Israel will be kept safe in the wilderness, fed by God for 1,260 days. And when the remnant of Israel slips through Satan's grasp, he will turn his attention to any remaining believers on the earth and begin to persecute them. Okay, I realize I've kind of included some other information that wasn't strictly in Revelation chapter 12. What you can see is that the information that we're given in Revelation 12 actually starts with the macro. Okay, we see a big sort of bird's eye timeline. And then as we continue reading through Revelation 12, what we see are the details that can be sort of slipped into this larger timeline. And as we go along with the timelines that we see in Revelation, okay, and we got a whole bunch of small ones here that we fit together into this big one. As we continue in Revelation, what we're going to see is that this 7 and 8, with the 8th day at the end, at this period of time, after the child is born or identified as a male child, after the child is born and between the time that it's born and it's caught up, there's going to be this time of persecution, of spiritual warfare during the 7th day and then the rapture on the 8th day. If you don't understand that there is going to be a time frame here, which any Jewish person who saw that the child was a male child would understand that the child is not presented to God until the 8th day. They would understand that there is a 7-day window here. This is really important because other whole chapters of Revelation, the events that are recorded in them, are going to be detailed, and they take place during this 7-day window, and then there are some that are going to take place on this 8th day period of time. And if you don't know that this is here, or that it's going to be here, that it's something you actually can, just know that that's going to be the case, that there's going to be 7 days with an 8th day, then when we start talking about other chapters of Revelation, we're going to match things up again, just like we matched the woman who fled into the wilderness for 1,260 days with the woman who's given eagle's wings, who is going to be in the wilderness for a time, times, and half a time. Okay, we just matched those two up. There are other places, there's other words, there's other ideas that are going to enable us to match up timelines that are in Revelation. I hope you can see that I haven't made anything up here. I haven't put anything into this that isn't there. So what I've done, I took Revelation 12 and broke it down into these separate timelines, and now we're matching up when things happen. So when does persecution for martyrs who they love not their lives? They overcame by the blood of the Lamb. Doesn't say they overcame the beast or anything like that. It just says that they died sometime before Satan was cast out of heaven. And we know there's going to be another persecution when the woman is in the wilderness. The serpent is going to make war on the woman's other offspring. These are other believers, because her offspring are all believers. So we know that there's more than one group of believers who are the woman's offspring. This is the first one, the male child. Okay, actually Christ would be the first one, but we also have this child who's born and then going to be persecuted, and then 7 days, and on the 8th day presented to God. This is not really for everybody, okay, but I'm really surprised that other pastors or other Bible teachers aren't looking at Revelation in this kind of detail. And it's really, it's not that hard to put Revelation 12 in a chronological order of events. And what we're going to do, once we've got the big picture, which is something, Revelation 12 is going to give us the macro. Okay, everything that we have here is the macro. And other chapters of Revelation, we're going to match them up and insert them into this big bird's eye view, and we're going to get more and more and more and more details about the things that are going to be taking place. And many of those details will happen during the 7 days. Many of them are going to happen on the 8th day. And we're going to also find how the seals and the trumpets actually will begin right about the same time, because we're going to match up some other events, just like we did with the woman. We're going to match up some other events that will enable us to show exactly how the trumpets and the seals are going to sort of come together. And then we have confirmation about this in other passages in Revelation. So I know this isn't for everybody. Not everybody can hold all this in their head, or that many people are as interested in breaking down the details so you can get a larger timeline. Most people only want to talk about the rapture. But, okay, our rapture is going to happen right here. And I have always said over the last 2-3 years that there is no rapture of the child who's going to rule and reign. There's no rapture of that group that's going to be among the 24 elders until Israel has a war. The woman must go into travail. There must be a war. Okay, and if there's no war, there's no birth. The birth only comes after labor. Now, there are people who are going to say, well, what about Isaiah 66, where before she was in labor, she gave birth? That's referring to Israel. That is not referring to believers during the time of the end. And you have to be able to keep those things separate. You can use the same kind of symbolism, but it doesn't mean that we're going to apply that passage in Isaiah to this passage right here in Revelation 12, where it clearly says the woman is in agony of travail before she gave birth. So I congratulate any of you who've stuck with me for this kind of long diagramming of Revelation 12. But this is how you got to do it. There is no other way to get a timeline out of Revelation except for doing this. And Revelation 12 is really the starting point, because it gives us that basic framework, that including the Revelation 12 sign that lets us know we're in the book of Revelation right now. I'm not saying we're in tribulation right now, because tribulation is persecution, right? But what I am saying is that we're actually in the book, and that the events that we read about in the book of Revelation are going to be happening very quickly. So I hope you've enjoyed this. Let me know what you think in the comments section. Get a copy of the PDF, and we'll see you on another video. Till then, have a blessed day.